She specializes in addiction, recovery, victimization, gender issues, immigration, and popular culture. She's published 4 books and 60 articles. Sounds like she's been busy. In addition to her other healing modalities, Dr. Mercadante uses spiritual memoir writing to help people discern the meaning in their lives. So please welcome Dr. Linda Mercadante.
Thank you for the introduction. I appreciate it. It's really nice to be in Vancouver. How many people here are Canadian? Raise your hand. How many people here are from the United States? Okay, can't tell any jokes about the United States then. I was going to do that, but I guess I won't. Okay. I can? Oh, all right, yeah, all right, I might then. I lived in Vancouver for 5 years when I got my master's degree at Regent College, which is on the campus of UBC. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but I loved it here so much. In fact, one of the people I went to school with is here, Wayne Worthy, and his wife Esther. They both came. It was like one of those blast from the past experiences that we reconnected. It was really nice. I don't think Wayne taught me this, but I learned a lot of things while I was in Canada. Maybe you did teach me this, Wayne. I learned that what to do when someone says pass the serviette. Do the other United States people here know that? You know what that means? Do you know what to do when they say put on your toque? They're being nice. They're not trying to offend you. And, well, I don't think I learned this from Wayne, but I did learn from one of the students from Alberta how to design a Halloween costume to fit over a snowsuit. It's useful information. Okay, well, since you want to hear something that about the U.S., I will add one other thing. And that's that when I was up here, I was told, I was given an extra canonical story about Genesis, about the creation of the world, and it was about the creation of Canada. Now, those of us in the United States, we don't have access to this story, but I learned this story, and I want to read this story to you. So you'll know that there's actually something that we're not aware of that's in the Canadian Bible. Okay. All right. I'm going to read this to you. Okay, on the 6th day of creation, God turned to the archangel Gabriel and he said, "Today I'm going to create a land called Canada." Now, the Canadians probably already know this story. Okay, it will be a land of outstanding natural beauty. It shall have tall, majestic mountains full of forest, elk, and moose, high cliffs overlooking sandy beaches, with an abundance of sea life and rivers stocked with salmon. God took a deep breath and then continued. "I shall make the land rich in oil so the inhabitants shall prosper. I shall call these inhabitants Canadians, and they shall be known as the friendliest people on earth." But Gabriel, he listened for a while, and he raised his hand. He wanted to ask God a question. He said, "Wait a minute. Don't you think you're being too generous to these Canadians?" So God paused a moment and then replied, "Not really. Just wait and see the neighbors I'm going to give them." I think it was Wayne that taught me not to say I was from America, but to say I was from the United States, because he reminded me that we're all from America, even, including Mexicans, it's all North America. So I did learn a lot. I did gain a little humility here as an American, and that was a good thing. Well, I was here for 5 years. I studied, I hiked, I cross-country skied. I had a wonderful time, and got my master's degree, and then I moved on, but I had no idea what lay ahead for me. I had absolutely no idea. I had no idea that one day I would become very involved with the topic of addiction, personally and professionally. Because at the time when I was here, I was just a newspaper journalist who thought I was going to take a year off from my work, get a degree, and then go back to New Jersey, where I was from, and go back to newspaper work, which I never did. Well, but just months before arriving in Vancouver, I had had a life-changing conversion experience. In just a year, I had moved from being an atheist, then to an agnostic, and then to a God believer. This all happened in 1 year. That was really a dramatic life change, and that's why I ended up here, because I heard about a school with a degree that appealed to me. And, okay, so after I had this conversion experience, I was now spiritual. But I wasn't exactly religious, maybe vaguely religious, but not really. I was mostly just spiritual. In fact, before that, I thought I was pretty spiritual too. Now I was meeting all these people that were actually religious and spiritual, and I found it very interesting to study what people believed and how it affected their behavior. Over time, I met a lot of believers that I admired, and I learned more about religion, and eventually I became committed to religious practices myself, like meditation, reading the Bible, and then I became open to exploring beliefs, doctrine, and even having some of my own, eventually. And I was very interested, as I said, in learning how doctrine influences behavior, which is very important. Well, gradually my career trajectory changed, and I never went back to journalism, as I said, but instead I became drawn to the academic study of religion and the vocation of teaching. Yet through all this time, I was blissfully unaware of the subject that would later come to consume me, which is addiction. Because you might be wondering, why is this person up there? You know, I'm not a therapist. I have a Ph.D., but you know, you could have a Ph.D. in a lot of things and not be qualified to speak to this conference, so that doesn't really do it. I mean, why in the world would they have invited me who's, you know, I am an ordained minister, but I teach. My vocation is teaching in a seminary. So you probably think, how did she get here? She probably wandered into the wrong meeting, you know. So I wanted to explain that eventually addiction would become almost a life-changing experience and topic for me. Well, still, I was in Vancouver, I studied, I did the degree, I was still completely unaware of addiction. But today I'm going to be speaking on addiction, helping addicts move beyond the spiritual wading pool, a new approach to spirituality and religion in the healing of addictions. So I'll have to tell you a little bit about how I got to this from that. Well, I moved back to New Jersey. I started at Princeton. I was still completely unaware of the topic. And in fact, as we say in New Jersey, I still didn't know from addiction. It's kind of a Jewish thing. I didn't know from addiction at all. In fact, I was a little bit like Kudzu. Have you ever seen this cartoon? I don't know if you've ever seen this particular one. Okay, he's a minister, and I know that doesn't look like a woman, but Ida May, I think is his assistant. I think that's a female. So anyway, he says, "You're out of line, Ida May, but you're not changing the lyrics to Kumbaya, but just updating a little bit? No. I refuse to let our young people sit around campfires toasting marshmallows singing someone's dysfunctional Lord Kumbaya." That's kind of how I felt about this whole therapeutic thing. And I stayed like that through my Ph.D. But in the fall of 1987, things began to change. At first, I didn't realize it because I was fresh out of Princeton. I had a nice, shiny new Ph.D., and I was invited to come to the Methodist Theological School in Ohio, which is in Delaware, slightly north of Columbus. And I was invited to come there and teach theology. That's a little picture of our school. It's actually pretty nice there, but the thing that distinguished it was that we had a degree at the time in a Master of Arts in Alcohol and Drug Abuse Ministry. It's the first, and as far as I know, still the only seminary in the country, maybe even the world. Well, I don't know, maybe Trinity now would have that too, but at least in the U.S., it's definitely the only seminary that has an actual degree in drug abuse, addiction, and drug abuse counseling. The degree has a different name now, but that's still a very strong component of it. So I arrived at this school in Ohio, and I didn't know Ohio. I was from New Jersey. I had lived on both coasts, never in the middle. So, you know, at first everything I encountered I thought was some Midwestern quirk. Because I went to this school, I started at this school. Now, I was hired to teach traditional topics. Wasn't hired to teach about addiction, like the doctrine of Christ, the doctrine of the church, introduction to theology. You know, these are standard things that theologians teach, which you may not know, but that's the kind of stuff we do. It might sound dull, but actually, I can make it sound exciting if I wanted to. I mean, it's pretty interesting. If you focus on it, it's pretty interesting. But I wasn't there to teach addiction, at least. Well, after a few weeks, I began to think this was the strangest place I had ever been. Because everywhere I went, people were talking about addiction. This is at a seminary. Now, Princeton, nobody ever talked about addiction at all. Never heard the word. In fact, this school was full of recovering addicts. I'd say 100% of the people in that degree program were recovering addicts, 100%. And then some of the other seminarians were also recovering from different things. I was a neophyte, so I just noticed it, but I didn't do anything about it. So in class, I tried to teach theology as I had been taught to do, and I kept getting all these interruptions in class. The students were very impatient. In fact, they were downright peevish with what I was teaching them. They wouldn't listen to me and take notes like nice, well-behaved students, you know. That's what they did at Princeton. What did I know, you know? But they kept wanting me to connect everything to addiction recovery, everything. They weren't happy at all unless I could draw clear parallels and give them practical advice. Not only that, but they objected to the content I was trying to give them. They didn't like the idea of sin. No, not they didn't like it. They hated the idea of sin. They hated it. They didn't think the church was much of a community. Not at all like their 12-step groups. That was a community, they said. And what about all these ideas about God that I was giving them? Too specific, too exclusive. They didn't like that. They wanted to talk about their higher power, who, according to them, could be anything and different for each person. You can see that me, as a theologian with no experience here, would be like, where am I? You know, first I thought, this must be some Ohio aberration, but then, because I wasn't from the Midwest, but then I started to realize this was an entire phenomenon that I had missed somehow. But the one thing that really struck me, even though they were at a seminary, many of them said that they and their friends in recovery were spiritual but not religious. This was their keystone of everything. Now, you might say, well, duh, why are you at a seminary? But okay, they were there, we were teaching them, we were happy to have them, especially since we're tuition-driven, you know, so we're happy to have everybody. I mean, we are selective, but nevertheless, we were glad they were there. But we still wondered, why did you pick us? Why did you come here? If you're spiritual but not religious, after all, half of your classmates are being prepared for the ministry in the United Methodist Church. So what's this about? Well, who are these people? I kept wondering, and why are they upsetting my lesson plans? You know, was it a strange Ohio thing? I don't know. But these people seemed to think they were like the Blues Brothers on a mission from their higher power. I just didn't get it. But a couple of years later, something happened. I discovered the alcohol problem of a close family member. This threw me into a personal crisis. It came complete with traumatic life changes, and it just made me reevaluate everything. But it also opened my eyes, because I began to find real wisdom and courage and just plain horse sense in these recovering people and those who helped and taught them. It was amazing. Rather than being shocked and put off, these people at my school were very helpful and understanding. They didn't seem surprised at all that a seminary professor would have experienced such things. And in the best sense of the word, they ministered to me. So I began to attend Al-Anon meetings. You all know what Al-Anon is, right? Okay, so I began attending Al-Anon meetings and other 12-step groups. I mean, I started getting interested in. I went, and this is, I think, in the 90s. So that's the peak of that wave, right? There was Emotions Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and every kind of anonymous you could imagine. Overeaters Anonymous. I just started going to all of them. I just couldn't believe that this was out there, and I kept this up for a very long time. Because if it was true, as my students said, and they didn't just say it, they insisted, that they experienced the presence of God in these meetings, and I figured that was where I needed to be. Of course, when I first began attending 12-step meetings, I didn't know the protocol. You know, I felt a little uncomfortable, and I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do, or how I was supposed to act, or what I was supposed to say. I think I was a little bit like Kathy. You know the cartoon Kathy? Kathy was, she had a problem. You know Kathy, she has a little shopping problem. You familiar with that? You know. Okay, so she, at one point, she decided to go to a 12-step meeting. I don't know if you remember this about Kathy, but she did. So she decides to go to Shoppers Anonymous. And she says, the leader says, hello, welcome to Shoppers Anonymous. By coming here tonight, you're taking the first critical step in breaking the cycle of compulsive shopping. Did you know this about Kathy? She had this problem? Okay. She says, together we will work to understand why we overshop and find ways to channel our stresses into more positive activities. Okay. Any questions so far? Kathy's sitting, this is her first meeting. Where did you get those darling shoes? You're new here, aren't you? You know, I was a little bit like Kathy. What do you think I did that was a mistake? What word do you think? Just take a wild guess. What do you think I said? You have any idea? What theological word I might have brought up? Yeah, sin. Big mistake. It's not like I was sitting there saying, you're all sinners in the hands of an angry God. No, I didn't do that. I wasn't that stupid. I mean, you know, I had a Ph.D. I was like not completely clueless. I mean, you know, all right. I had a little education, but not in that, of course. No, I did say, you know, is there a lot of difference between, I don't know, it sounds a lot like sin. I know you're saying it's addiction, and I questioned the idea of disease, and I might have mentioned to church like there were similarities between the way the meetings were structured and the way religious services were structured. I mean, I was just really naive and asking these sort of general questions. No, they hated that. You never heard a more profound, crushing silence than when I said something in these meetings. Yeah, it was serious. So I was kind of like the religious version of Kathy, but I didn't know any better. Now, by then, I was already committed to the church. I mean, I didn't start out that way, but by then I was committed to the church. After all, by then I was an ordained, you know, I was ordained in the Presbyterian church. I didn't have a church, but I got ordained. And I was teaching in the United Methodist Seminary, so that's pretty committed to the church. And in fact, I had had a very positive experience in the church myself. It's a long story. I just wrote a book about it. It's called Bloomfield Avenue. It'll be out in September. Little promo. But anyway, I had this very sort of archetypal baby boomer, you know, spiritual pilgrimage going on, all these, you know, Eastern religion groups and things. So when I come into the church, and I wasn't bent to think that the Protestantism was going to be a good thing. I hadn't been raised as a Protestant, so I wasn't amenable to Protestantism, but I actually had a very positive experience among Protestants, among the church. It had been a welcoming place to me when I was in a crisis, so I didn't see a problem. I didn't see the discordancy that they saw. But I did have to agree with my recovering students that something needed to be done to help addicts and recovering persons gain the benefits of religion without feeling afraid, judged, or judgmental of it. And they were feeling judged and they were judgmental, so it went both ways. Something needed to be done. My students weren't going to do it, but something needed to be done to bring addiction, recovery, and religion, not just addiction, recovery, and spirituality together. That's what I wanted to do. But I encountered this rather large stumbling block, as I said earlier, the insistence that it's preferable, not just okay, but better, to be spiritual but not religious. Well, eventually I wrote a book on this called Victims and Sinners, The Spiritual Roots of Addiction and Recovery. And it wasn't just a promo for the 12 steps, it was, you know, critical and positive. It was an evaluation. And I showed a lot of the similarities between the way the 12 steps operated and its history. In fact, I'll be talking about the history of this in my workshop after this keynote. And I saw a lot of similarities between some Christian understandings, or a type of Christian understanding, and the 12 steps. So you can read that book to see what I discovered. But I didn't stop my explorations with this book. Instead, I continued to ponder the linkages between addiction, recovery, spirituality, and religion. And so this morning, I want to share some of these insights with you. Well, that's the address if you want to get that. Okay, so this is what I want to work with you today on. I want to discuss the connection between religion and spirituality. And I notice we haven't done that here. We've used those words, we've used them fairly liberally, but we haven't really gotten down to really discussing them. So I'm glad that, you know, there's space for me to do that. If someone else had done it, I don't know what I would have done now. Okay. I want to see where addicted and recovering people fit into this picture. And then I want to propose what I call a circle of spiritual guidance to help us move people out of the wading pool of spirituality and help them start swimming. Okay, for a long time, as I said, my institution has been about the only place where religion and spirituality have been considered in the treatment of addictions. I think maybe more places are coming along now. But the school has practiced a very integrative approach. It's not just a 12-step approach. It looks at, it uses the field of psychology and sociology. It does a very good job of integrating different perspectives, and the Ohio State provides many professors for us, and they have very good counseling programs, and there are quite a few of them. So we're integrated with them. And the thing that's different from us is that, with us, is that we do look at religion, not just spirituality, and we look at them both very deeply. Well, for a long time I was unaware that this is an unusual approach, but I've gradually come to understand that for a very long time the field of psychology and also that of medicine, which obviously are places where addiction is often first discovered and treated, they virtually ignored spirituality and religion, up until recently. In fact, one researcher discovered that the word spirituality did not even appear in Medline until the 1980s. I'm sure you're aware of that. Okay, well, this is changing, and you're aware of that too, of course, because this conference is evidence of that. Because in the last decade or so, spirituality and even religion have become hot topics in both the medical and psychological fields. In fact, I think this past year and a half, I've spoken at 4 or 5 conferences. Suddenly, it's not anathema to invite somebody that actually works in the field of religion to come speak to therapists. I don't think that was too common in the past, and maybe it's still pretty uncommon, but it's interesting to me that that would be the case. Well, here's what Paul Mills says in the Annals of Behavioral Medicine. Attention to topics of spirituality, religiousness, and health has increased substantially in medical and graduate school curricula, clinical practice, and research. Of the many interesting aspects of this phenomenon, perhaps the most remarkable is the observation that medical science, the field of inquiry that initially separated mind from body, now finds it compelling and perhaps even necessary to re-examine the relationship among spirit, mind, and body. In fact, he goes on, in recent years, every major medical, psychiatric, and behavioral medicine journal has published, every one, he says, on the topic of religion and health or spirituality and health. I was just interviewed for a journal of sociology, and that was their topic too. This is not just in journals, but also in curriculum. For another researcher reports in the New England Journal of Medicine, this person says nearly 30 U.S. medical schools now offer courses on religion, spirituality, and health. So that's really a change from the 1980s. So, we're excited, I'm excited about this, you're probably excited about this, but a problem still exists. Because these fields are still trying to hold spirituality and religion apart from each other. And I think that's probably would be a theme for some people here. We try to separate spirituality and religion as though these are two distinct things that can be pulled apart and examined. Now, I understand why we do it. The impulse to separate spirituality and religion is a relatively new concept. I'll go in a minute to why I can understand why it's being done. But we have to realize, though, first, that the concept of spirituality is not a new thing. In fact, 100 years ago, what do you think people called what we now call spirituality? What word do you think they used? Do you have any idea? No, not witchcraft. No, it was a different word. It didn't sound like spirituality, but there was a word that people used which, in religion, to talk about somebody's being spiritual, but they were still religious at the same time. You don't know the word? Anybody want to take a guess? That's it. Very good. Piety. Exactly. Right. Piety. In fact, I remember from my days in Britain where I did some work that the worst thing a young person could call another young person was pie. Ever hear that? Pie, meaning you're pious. That meant you were wearing your religion on your sleeve, showing it off, making your religious practices public. Well, even now you sometimes hear the word piety. I can't speak for other religions, but among Christians of all persuasions, the word piety has historically referred to a variety of beliefs and practices related to personal religious devotion and daily Christian living, a type of people's theology expressed in practical Christian experience. Popular piety involves certain inner religious experiences and outward observances which contribute to spiritual growth. Now, how many of those words that we've been talking about are in that definition? We've been talking about religion, spirituality, and piety. Are they all in there? If just a sheer linguistic examination of this quote, which is from the Dictionary of Christianity in America, reveals that all three things, religion, piety, and spirituality, are thoroughly intermixed. And I'm going to take this theme further in a minute. So in this, look at this quote again. There's no separation of belief and practice, right? And inner experience is not separated from outward observance. And isn't that kind of how we break that down often? We say, well, and I'll say this in a minute, spirituality is inward, religion is outward. I mean, I'm going to go into how we break that down in a minute. But in this quote, at least, there's no such separation made. Well, okay, what about the use of the word spirituality today? Same thing. In the same dictionary, there is no attempt to separate spirituality and religion, even when we remove the word piety. Instead, there are types of spirituality connected to types of Christianity. So there would be a distinctive Catholic spirituality, a Lutheran spirituality, an evangelical spirituality, Quaker spirituality, and so forth. And each would have its distinctive beliefs, practices, and desired experiences. And the same can be said for others of the world's religions, that they would have their distinctive spiritualities. But nevertheless, many people today want to separate religion and spirituality. According to BeliefNet.com, are you familiar with this really good website, BeliefNet.com? It's a religion website, very open, all religions. Okay, that someone there said, more than 1/5 of Americans describe themselves with this phrase, saying, I'm spiritual but not religious, 1/5. Now, very interestingly, this number represents half of those who are unaffiliated with any particular religion. So, I guess if that's 10% of Americans say they're not affiliated, half of those people say I'm spiritual but not religious. I don't know what the other half are saying. Okay, well, according to Robert C. Fuller, professor of religious studies, people who claim I'm spiritual but not religious, here's what we can say about them. They reject traditional organized religion as the sole or even the most valuable means of furthering their spiritual growth. Many claim negative experiences with organized religion. They show negative feelings towards clergy and churches. This is a survey. They're more prone to experimentation and a kind of Lone Ranger approach. They want to pick and choose, keep their search individualized, and refrain from deeply committing themselves to any community. Many see spirituality as a pathway to personal growth or development. So does this sound familiar to you? Is that pretty much, you think they're accurate in describing that, the people that would say that? Okay, well, I understand why people would want to separate spirituality and religion, because, okay, here's the kind of cut and dried way that people would say this. If you press someone, what's spirituality? Well, people feel spirituality is generic and individual. In other words, you don't have to commit to any one group, and you're not offending anybody. And religion just seems too particular and collective. You have to go with other people's ideas and do what they want you to do, and so forth. In fact, I have a friend who said she believed in God, but she didn't want to go to church. And I remember this because she stuck her finger right in my face, and she said, I don't want somebody sticking their bony finger in my face saying, you have to do this. No one ever stuck their bony finger in my face in a church, but she didn't go, she never went to church, but that was her, fear that she would meet somebody like that. I always remember that bony finger thing. Skeletal or old, I don't know what that meant. Okay. All right, so there's a couple stereotypes, okay? What's another way people would say, if you pressed them, what's spirituality and what's religion? And believe me, this is in many journals, people trying to do this, okay? Spirituality seems non-dogmatic and open-ended, right? You don't have, it's more tolerant. Religion seems judgmental and prescriptive. Well, these divisions are, in my opinion, and you might not agree with me, I bet you a lot of people don't, but I think they're kind of arbitrary and artificial, which I'll go into in a minute. And I do think they're arbitrary and artificial, but I understand why people are doing them, and especially therapists. I understand very well, and I'm going to go into that in a minute, why you would feel compelled to do this. Okay, before I say that, though, what is it about religion? What is it about religion that makes people not want to commit to it or claim it, even if they are. I mean, many people would probably be involved in some religious group, but not make a big deal out of it. And what is it about religion that makes it a hard sell, kind of? Well, first of all, religion is very diverse. It's not unilateral on beliefs and practices. You really can't talk about religion in some kind of global sense, because it's way more diverse than that. You can't even talk about Christianity, the church, or Buddhism, or anything. It's just such a diverse phenomenon. It's not easily categorized in any one way. Even people in the same congregation understand their faith very differently. We know that really well when we prepare people for ministry. The second most obvious factor, and you have to tell me these are corresponding because I can't quite see that. If I'm like in the wrong place, do that. Okay. The second most obvious factor is that religion can be both highly functional, providing solid values and healthy behavioral norms, but as you all know probably fairly well, it can also become dangerously dysfunctional, right? Leading to or playing into neuroses and delusions. We know that. Well, while these issues make religion a difficult subject to deal with, there's one thing that's constant about religion. For throughout human history, religion has existed to provide a framework of meaning for people, making sense of life and death. In fact, across time and culture, religion has been the most constant source of meaning for humanity. And this is a conference on meaning. And this has been one of the prime places people have found meaning throughout human history and across culture. That doesn't mean it's the religion, it's like our religion, but it's what we could categorize fairly clearly as religion. So to say that religion can be used harmfully and so it should be avoided is like saying we shouldn't eat food because some of it is junk. It's just too global of a statement. But religion is complex. So I understand why we want to hold it at arm's length. I mean, I don't have to, of course, but I understand why in the field of therapy you would want to do that. We all recognize that religion presents practical problems for counselors, therapists, and medical personnel. Okay, so what's the first thing? What do you think? What's the first thing that would cause you a problem if you wanted to bring religion up in the therapeutics situation setting? I bet you don't bring it up probably too much unless you're helping someone work through an issue, right? So what would stop you? Oh, you don't want to project your own bias. Yeah, right. Okay, anything else? Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, I can see why you would do that. But actually, there's plenty of people in a seminary that would call that religious too. So let's see why for a therapist it would. Well, I mean, let's see if I got it right. Let's see what I thought. Okay. See if I got it right. Okay. Ethical concerns, right? You don't want to impose your own position. You don't want to dictate to somebody. That's for sure. You don't want to impose your own value system on a client or your own religious perspective if you have one. Issues of diversity, right? How do you know? I mean, that you may be subscribing to one type of Christianity and they might be very conservative, you might be more liberal or vice versa. You don't want to do that. You don't want to, you want to respect diversity, okay? You want to, rather than doing them a disservice, you want to stay with some kind of generic experience everybody can relate to, just like you were saying. Issues of expertise, that's really important. Not everyone feels qualified. In fact, very few people, even ministers, don't often feel completely qualified to guide somebody. I mean, the role of a spiritual director is a pretty defined role. There's training programs for that. In order to do it non-coercively, in order to help a person open up to God, it's an art. And most of us would need to be, pretty well trained to do that with respecting the other person and with integrity. So we know we don't always have the expertise for that. So even for those of us with seminary degrees know how hard it was to master even one religious perspective. So of course, you can't claim to understand all of them. And as a therapist, that wasn't your training. You may have a personal appreciation and knowledge, but you're not trained to do that as a professional. Okay, but when people try to separate spirituality and religion, I feel that it's artificial because it leads to stereotypes. Okay, so I've read many articles that go through all kinds of contortions in order to define religion and spirituality as separate and distinct. And as I said, I think it's counterproductive. Well, David Moberg in the Journal of Adult Development has examined many of these articles. Okay, so hundreds of articles try to do this. He finds 3 types of separation. Here's kind of the way it breaks down when people try to separate spirituality and religion. All right, he says there's 3 polarizations that differentiate religiousness from spirituality. They either see it as organizational religion versus personal spirituality. In other words, religion's the organization and the spirituality is kind of what's happening on the inside of you. Substantive religion versus functional spirituality. Substantive, I guess, meaning more the structure. And negative religiousness versus positive spirituality, which is, I think, what you were alluding to, and that's a real big stereotype in our culture. I don't think that the entire stereotype comes from personal experience. I think it's like an ethos that we have imbibed, and that's part of our culture, just like America tends to be anti-intellectual. And we kind of all imbibe that, like it's, we're all very pragmatic. We kind of just grow up breathing that in the air. So I think we're all kind of anti-institutional. We kind of grow up breathing that in the air. Well, the last of these false dichotomies is the most problematic, and I hear it the most often. But I think the idea that religion is ritualized, dogmatic, and dead, and spirituality is personal, pure, and positive, that's the most common polarization, I think. But I think that these polarizations they're quick and dirty, they're cut and dry, but they're simple and they're simplistic. They don't take into account many things. Okay, so I want to pull back from this now and say, what are they not taking into account? Okay, are you with me here? All right? First of all, spirituality and religion are interwoven. Hardly anyone experiences them completely apart. Second, both are multifaceted and they require an integrated perspective to do them justice. And third, if all of life is sacred, we can't find much practical difference between the 2 concepts in real life terms. Okay, now, if you forced me, you forced me to say what I thought the difference was, I just give you a metaphor, which is always something that breaks down eventually, a metaphor, but it gives you a picture, an image, a picture. I'd say spirituality is like the gas, with religion being the vehicle. You can't drive without both. Or maybe, even better, religion is like language. Spirituality may be the meaning, but you can't separate the meaning from the language. Because whenever you learn your native language, when you learn your native language growing up, you also learn how to think and how to feel and how to understand reality from inside that linguistic framework. You can't separate those things. Anybody that's studied a foreign language, like especially Hebrew or something really different, knows that you gain a whole new perspective on reality. Everything's different. The way the verbs, the nouns, the way they're conjugated, everything is different. It gives you a whole other perspective on reality. You're not just learning to talk to somebody. Okay, so I don't think you can pull the 2 things apart, religion and spirituality. In the end, what we call spirituality also comes to us in the vehicle of some religious framework, whether that religious framework is traditional or non-traditional. In the end, separating religion and spirituality trivializes and minimizes religion and makes spirituality overly generic and amorphous. Okay, here's what Robert Fuller again says. He says the word spiritual and religious are really synonyms. You can read that. Okay, now I want to move on and say, and I'll go through this really quickly because I think you know this, most Americans, North Americans, do not separate religion and spirituality. On the street, this is not happening. What we try to do for academic purposes or for purposes of analysis is very unusual, except for that 5% of people that I mentioned earlier, okay? And you probably already know this. 96% believe in God. I think you all know this. 9 out of 10 people say they pray. Many state that their faith is a central guiding force in their lives, and interest is growing because in 1994, 58% of respondents expressed interest in spirituality, and 4 years later, in 1998, there was a 25% increase, up to 82%. That's a lot. Excuse me? Yeah, I think it's due to a lot of things, but there's also a trend that our way of living has not been working that well, and I think people are trying to find another way or an add-on way or something else to deepen our experience. I mean, don't ask me that now because as a theologian I'm going to give you, a long answer, which is unrelated probably to this. Let me just see if there's... I also want to just show you that 67% say religion is very important, 2/3 say they are members of a church or synagogue, and 42% say they attend services regularly. So those numbers are really high. The statistics are high. I think you knew this, but I just thought I'd remind you of it. Do you also, you're probably also familiar with the fact that religion just through surveys is reported to be good for your health. I'm just talking physical health, right? Now, a lot of people say they believe it's good for your health, but they also studied whether it really was good for your health. And they discovered a 25 to 30% reduction in the risk of mortality. That doesn't mean you have eternal life, but for the time of the study, during the time of the study, less people died of the population they studied that were actively involved in religion. Yeah, at first I went, whoa, that's pretty good. Okay, instant salvation. Okay, and that was from the American Psychologist. Okay, so that was not from a theological journal. Okay, now I've spent a lot of time paving that ground. What about addicts? Because that's what we're here for, right? Typically, addicts are known to be alienated from religion and spirituality, and I think that the people here could affirm that as far as their experience counseling people with addictions. Not that they never were involved, I'm not claiming that, but it's during the period of their addiction. I don't think they've studied, well, they may have, but I don't have access to studies about prior to becoming addicted. And recovery is often associated with corresponding improvement on spiritual measures. In fact, this researcher claims the addiction field is one of the few health fields where enthusiasm for spiritual factors in recovery has never been lost. That's William Miller, who was mentioned I think 2 days ago. So, the addiction literature generally indicates that spiritual religious involvement is a protective factor against the development of problems. And there's evidence that persons suffering from alcohol and other drug problems show low levels of spiritual religious involvement, and that recovery heightens that. Well, that's good. I'm happy. But it's not good enough, because even persons with many years of sobriety, even people in deep recovery, are still likely to insist that they're spiritual but not religious. And my goal today is to say that's not good enough. I think we need to do more for them. I think they're still in the spiritual wading pool, and I think they need to swim. I don't want to see them splashing around for the rest of their lives in the wading pool, and that's what I see among the people I teach, that they are actually held back, and not just the people I teach, but I know tons of recovering people personally and professionally, and I find oftentimes they're held back, and they're held back sometimes by an ideology that religion is bad for them, and that spirituality is safe, and all those other stereotypes that I went through before. Okay? So that is my main point, and I'm going to propose something to take them further, all right? In fact, Bill Wilson even admitted to this. He said, Alcoholics Anonymous is just a spiritual kindergarten. Bill Wilson, the founder, one of the co-founders of AA. So how can we let people stay in kindergarten? We wouldn't do that normally. We have these really big people on these little teeny-weeny desks. It just doesn't look right. I mean, they need to graduate. They need to move on. They need to go to first grade, second grade, and so forth. So what are we going to do? We have the ethical problem, the diversity problem, the expertise problem. How are we going to help people non-coercively and ethically move on to something that has been proven to be good for their recovery and just good for their general health? Not to mention this, that they'll never die. That's really a great statistic. Okay, well, maybe they will, but nevertheless, hopefully not from their addiction. Okay, so recovery helps them get their feet wet spiritually. It eases them into the wading pool, and frankly, I know that sometimes that's the biggest journey of all, and the fact that you even got them there is fabulous. And maybe they can only stay in that little bit of water for a really long time, but I'm looking at people that want to move on. That's the kind of people we get. They're ready to move on, and so I was trying to find something, to propose something to help them non-coercively move on. Okay. All right, let's see what we've got. I call this a circle of spiritual guidance. All right, first we'll look at the process. This is something I'm going to propose and probably write up, but right now it doesn't exist on paper. So I'm just trying this out on you. If you think it's horrible, let me know now, because then I won't try to write this up and I'll change it or something. This is like my test, I'm testing it. Okay. All right, I want to make a suggestion. I can't go into great detail, but here's what I hope this will do. 1, allow people to enter at whatever place they can. It's going to be a circle. Take into account diversity of background and tradition, which is obviously very important. Not minimize or trivialize religion, which I obviously am very concerned about. Recognize that while not everyone has the expertise to be a religious and spiritual mentor, everyone can make a contribution to spiritual healing. Now, I think that this schema works well with Christian theology, but I think if you test it against Buddhism, Islam, and other religions, it may be amenable to those as well, but then I would need someone from those other faiths to confirm that for me. Okay, what is it about religion that keeps people healthy? Well, there's a lot of tangible factors like enlarging your circle of friends, but there's also intangible factors, and the most important intangible factor is having meaning and purpose in your life and the values that promote this. So how do we find meaning in life, and what values keep people sober? All right, this is the crux of what I want to propose. I want to offer 4 active values. I call them active values, and you'll see why, to help each person discover the meaning of their own life and connect it with others. And hopefully, from my perspective, this would be best, lead them on to a recognized religious community. Okay, here's the 4 active values. Risk for good, and I'll go back and explain each one in a minute. Risk for good. Hope actively. Accept accountability. Seek higher ground. Okay, let me explain them briefly, and I'll show a little bit how they segue into religion. Okay, risk for good. Take a risk that good will prevail. I mean, I think addicts are known as risk takers, but do they risk that good will happen? And then that's an active risk, because you have to contribute your effort to make it happen. So you're risking for good, but you must also make the effort to make good happen. So it's an active, these are active values. The highest good is one who ensures that good will prevail, and you can see where that would lead to. So risk that there is that one, that higher power, that God. Risk, take a chance, like Pascal's wager. That's what it's called. Take a chance that there's a God. If you are wrong, really, there's no big consequences against you. But if you risk the other way and you're wrong, there may be consequences. So why not risk for good? Risk that there is someone who guarantees good will win in the end. Okay, what about hoping actively? Hope even against hope, but hope actively. Your hope has to help bring about what you hope for. It has to be mediatorial hope. You have to help mediate what you're hoping for to come about. Your hope rests on the belief that there is someone who will make it come out right in the end, but your help is needed. I mean, in religion, we would say you're the hands and feet of God. Those are the only hands and feet God has. So you're hoping, but you're also working towards it. And your hope rests on the fact that there is a larger power, greater than you, who is also moving in that same direction, who wants good to prevail, who will make it happen. Accept accountability. Choose or will and/or accept your connection to others. Recognize how your life affects others. First, you have to recognize that your life affects others, and a lot of people aren't even there yet, but that would be the first thing. Recognize that your life affects others. Even somebody on the street, your life could affect them whether you scowl at them or smile at them. So if it's that seemingly tangential, that your life has an effect even that way, imagine about the people in your own family, the people you know. So accept accountability to the people that you're affecting, because you are affecting them. Just accept that reality. Becoming accountable is a simple recognition of this fact that your life affects others, but you have to live it. Once you accept it, it does require something of you. And then seek higher ground. Don't stay in the floodplain. Keep moving towards higher ground. I would say, keep pushing them. Your goals are not high enough. Those are good goals, but they're not high enough. Like, I want more money. Fine, what for? Well, my son would say, because I want to buy, really great fancy cars. Okay, why? Why do you want those fancy cars? I mean, I could see why you would, but is that going to be enough? I mean, what's that about? What if when you had so much money and you had so many cars, you just had too many cars? Well, then I'd start giving these to my friends. Oh, well, that's interesting. Why would you be giving them to your friends? So I would keep pushing them to higher and higher ground. Your goals are not high enough. Keep pushing yourself beyond your present goal to something even better. Ultimately, the goal will be so large that you will need lots of help, both human and divine. You won't be able to do it all yourself. And you can see that these are not steps, they're a circle. You can enter anywhere. If you risk for good, you're instinctively hoping there's a guarantor of your actions, that it won't be a waste of time and fruitless. If you accept your connection to others, you must have higher goals than just your own self-interest. You might start out with self-interest, but when those self-needs are met, you have a little luxury there to think bigger. If you search for higher ground, you're involving more people just naturally, because eventually what you want is so big you can't do it yourself. To do this, you must take the risk that good will win in the end, and you can see you're going around the circle. If you see your connectedness, you can also see that you can pull each other down. You can have a negative effect, not just a positive effect. So you need to hope that good will prevail and actively use your efforts to contribute to that. Your example and encouragement will catch up other people in this quest in action. Risking for good is ultimately counting on the fact that there is a good God. I mean, even people that believe in God don't always believe that God is good. They think God, is out to get them. So, I mean, that's a step in the right direction to think there's a good God. So risking for good is already pushing you towards that position. Accepting your connection to others and living it out is realizing we're in community with one another. So this can become your entry into a religious community. If you search even higher, you may arrive at God's goals, at acceptance, at compassion, at peace, at a desire to help out for those things in any way you can. So anyway, you can see that it's a circle. You can start anywhere, but I think if you use these active values, or at least that's what I need to know from you. Do you think this would work with your clients? I can say it works with my students because I'm in a seminary, okay, and people are already fairly progressed spiritually before they get to us. But how does it work with people that you see? Is there anything here that would be useful to you? But let me just summarize really briefly what I've said. It's artificial and counterproductive to separate religion and spirituality. Religion is even good for you. As much as we know, it can also harm. It can have bad effects. And we need to help addicts move further in their spirituality once they admit that they have one and they are working on it. And one little sidebar, if you are encouraging people to move and connect, there'll never be a perfect religious community. So never look for the perfect religious community. They're like families. They're like AA groups. They're not perfect. But hopefully you'll find one that fits the person you're working with. And that may take some work. And that's hoping for good. Hoping and not just going to one and somebody's doing the bony finger and then you never go back to anyone at all, which is kind of a big reaction to one small incident. And people don't always hope. They say, I had bad experience with the church once, and that's it, and they're done with it. But connecting with the community is very healthy, as you know. That's why AA works, I think, one of the reasons it does. So we can no longer encourage people to say they're spiritual but not religious, and instead of keeping people in the spiritual wading pool, I think we need to help them learn to swim in the deep grace of God. Thank you.